It's 7:30, so I think we'll start. I'll just go through that again. So first of all, I'd like to really welcome everyone to Sheep Vet Society, Flock Health Club, Sheep Vets Fit for the Future webinars. And I really would like to welcome Phil Stocker from the NSA and Nick Hart, President of the Sheep Vet Society. So thanks so much for joining.
Good evening.
Phil and Nick. I don't think either of you need introduction, but maybe I'll just whiz through. So Phil's been with the NSA since 2011. Previously Soil Association, previous to that farming himself, and quite encouragingly, Phil describes his vision for the NSA as being an influential and respected organisation to lead the UK sheep industry in a forward-thinking way with a strong focus on flock health, efficiency, viable markets, and an attractive and healthy environment. So brilliant that you're with us, Phil.
Distance, Fiona. Sometimes I need to look a long way, but it's there. It's there.
You're still looking out for buzzards. So welcome to Phil, brilliant. And to Nick Hart, President of Sheep Vet Society, but in his, I don't know which you do in his spare time actually, Nick, but along with Mimi, you run family farm, breeding pedigree Charolais and producing finishing lambs. It's brilliant you could be with us, Nick. I won't give your age away. Qualified in the RVC and got a certificate for sheep health and production more than 25 years ago, and works for AB Europe now, RAM Health and Production. So brilliant. And really for this webinar particularly, we want to thank all our sponsors, and you can see them all on this screen, but particularly for this webinar as our headline sponsors, MSD, Project Lamb. So thanks ever so much to everyone who is supporting us. So let's crack on. UK sheep industry, fantastic, wildly varied. We've got over 90 different breeds, hugely important, most important producer in Europe, 5th largest producer in the world, and we're known for being extensive, high welfare, and generally low antibiotic use. And so we've got a lot to shout about for the British sheep industry, not necessarily without issues, potentially falling lamb consumption in the UK and elsewhere in the world. Potentially we've got a number of health issues, and that's probably the last I'm going to say in this webinar about health issues. So normally as vets, that's what we talk about all the time. But as we introduce this series of webinars for vets, we're actually purposefully steering away from health issues and talking about the wider, bigger picture of the industry. So there we go for health for today. But we are going to be talking about economics. And here, the most recent economics I could find was 2016. But you can see on this graph here for grazing livestock, LFA grazing livestock, well, all across the board actually, if this is the zero line, on average, agriculture makes a loss, and most people's income is made up by basic payment and agri-environmental schemes, which is a huge challenge, as we all know. And it's easily, in a way, easily explainable when you go into the detail on some farms, and on average, we know that sheep farmers are making a loss. The message I always shout about with farmers is that actually we have to be in the top third, maybe the top 20%. We can't actually afford to be average, but nevertheless, for our average sheep farms, this has a huge impact. Do Phil, Nick, either of you want to jump in there, make any comments?
Only really to say that you know, there's some really sobering facts there, aren't there? That only a small percentage of the top operators are making a positive margin, and the others are highly dependent on basic payment and agri-environment scheme, and we know that those two areas of funding are going to be under pressure in the future. So
yeah, and this basically is really where the industry is, and it's what the industry needs to put right and move away from the resting on support, which is something we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to that. I thought before then we would just talk about the immediate, and of course the price of lamb is always very important. And both these graphs, well, this bottom one with the range of figures over the months for the last 5 years, and the average in this dotted line. But actually, I thought it's quite interesting to see what happened to the lamb price at the beginning of this year, and it was unprecedentedly high, made everyone feel brilliant. So, you know, let's discuss why that was. I've got a few thoughts there. There were a lot of lambs sold. I think everyone was nervous about Brexit, weren't they, at the end of last year? And growing was really good, so there was a lot of lambs ready to go. And there was quite good UK retailer backing of lamb. Would you agree with that, Phil? They
definitely, and I think it's a trend that we've seen over the last few years, and there's still a few retailers that are making those commitments about moving to a higher commitment to British lamb over the next few years, as Waitrose being one of those in 2021. So, and again, it's an interesting thing because the retailers are wanting to source more British lamb, and as producers, we've often for years said we need that commitment from our retailers. And I guess the commitment has got, we will get to a point where that commitment needs to go both ways. We can't ask for their commitment and get it, and then choose to go and sell our lamb somewhere else. You know, it's going to be an interesting dilemma at some stage in the future, but you're absolutely right there. And again, that final point on your slide there, Fiona, we did see far fewer New Zealand and Australian imports, New Zealand mainly, because they were very aware of an uncertain picture in the UK. So they definitely targeted less New Zealand lamb to the British market, and that helped us enormously.
Right, so not just a weather thing there, they actually purposely
they were very aware of the volatile situation in our market, and they kept away from it. And I think it was probably in October that they were saying that we would see 50% less lamb from New Zealand on our shores over the winter months.
Right. Going on, what's going to happen from now on? I am actually, both Nick and I have spoken to Kevin from Randall Parker Foods, and really grateful for him for his insights. Kevin's thoughts were that the price will remain strong for a couple of weeks because there are so many fewer hoggets around and the numbers are massively reducing. So he says they still have a lack of hoggets. He reckoned retail trade was now pretty much back to normal, but he's expecting the price to fall much quicker than usual. So it always falls July, and everyone's sort of ready for that. But Kevin's comments was he's telling people get their earlies away as soon as possible. Thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's really sobering when you look at that top graph and you see towards the end of March the lamb price dropped by like a stone, really, by a pound a kilo live. And again, it was really sobering, the fact that was almost due entirely to the lockdown, the closure of the hospitality market, and not just here in the UK, but in other parts of Europe as well. So immediately that really it cut off our exports almost overnight, not for very long, for a period of about 2 weeks possibly. And again, you know, that hospitality market here in the UK, our hotels, our restaurants, our pubs. Again, it's interesting, for years we thought that we weren't maybe moving much volume of product through those outlets. It's probably grown over the last 4 or 5 years, but that just shows you what impact the loss of that market has suddenly. You know, that it's not just volume, it's also a particularly high value cuts that are going into that catering trade that suddenly were lost. And the retail sale profile, I guess, is very different to, you know, we buy very different products in retail that we cook for ourselves compared to what we might choose to eat when we're out in a restaurant or in a hotel. So it's that high-end cut that took out the marketplace, really.
Right, so are we going to have carcass balance issues?
Yeah, and I think volume issues, because lambs are doing so well. Grass has been good, although we could actually use a bit of rain. But lambs are performing extremely well, so they'll probably come to market a little bit sooner than most years. So we're going to see that usual sort of increase of numbers of lambs maybe outstripping what the trade requires because they're doing particularly well. So that downturn could actually come a little bit sooner than usual. So there is that, if you like, concern in the background about perhaps oversupply.
Yeah, and then the big unknown, Phil. Shall I move on to your next slide, which is, we're talking what your thoughts Brexit wise, if you can go to your glass ball, Phil.
Yeah. Okay, so we will get into Brexit here a little bit, but this just gives an oversight of the way that our UK sheep meat market is balanced. And you would have seen a lot of this in the last 4 years now, since we've been talking about Brexit, since the EU referendum. But that figure of 65% of our production being consumed here in the UK, in our domestic market, and 35% of our product being exported, and 96% of that total export volume at the moment goes into the European market. So that's why that risk last year, back in March and then again in October, of crashing out of the European Union with no deal, and potentially the loss of that market entirely, or the application of tariffs around that time, anything that would impact on our ability to move sheep meat into Europe would just crush that export volume and lead to an oversupply on our domestic market here. There's been a lot of effort being put into by government and by all of our levy bodies in trying to open up markets elsewhere in the world, but that's a long-term game, and to replace that volume of lamb that currently goes into Europe is not going to happen overnight. So we would produce somewhere in a region in 2019, somewhere in a region of 290,000 tonnes. And as I say, 35% of that volume goes largely into the European Union. In terms of exports and in imports, we turned over the last couple of years into a net exporter of lamb. There was a time not very long ago when we were more or less in balance, and we would export virtually the same amount of sheep meat that we import. At the moment, we're exporting more than we're importing. So our imports, that pie chart on the right hand side, show that imports have been down by 19% over the year, and our exports have been up over the year. So you could look at that and you could say, well, we're doing really well on exports, and we are generally. I mean, our export trade is very, very good. But with exports up and imports down, the result of all that, of course, is that we're consuming less sheep meat here in the UK. So our domestic market is declining, which is what Fiona alluded to earlier on. And you also know that that with that 65% of our sheep meat production being sold on our domestic market is really, really important to us. And it becomes even more important when we get disruption in trade, whether that be through a coronavirus and a breakdown of the supply chain, or whether it be through a foot and mouth outbreak. When that export trade is disrupted, our domestic market becomes even more important. So again, to me, it always seems sensible to keep emphasizing the importance of that domestic market, that need to invest in our domestic market here, because it's a very stable market, and in times of difficulty is absolutely crucial to us. Just to mention that domestic market as well, again, we're very lucky compared to some of the other meat sectors to have quite a lot of diversity in our market outlets. And within our domestic market, we've obviously got the supermarket trade, which is a big proportion of that volume, but we've also got high street butchers who would do quite well in terms of selling lamb, farm shops. And again, both of those, high street butchers and farm shops, have been reporting their throughput up by something like 300% over this lockdown period. So again, people have been flocking to those sorts of outlets to buy good quality meat, maybe replacing the high quality meat that they would have eaten if they'd have gone out for a meal on a Friday or Saturday night. I don't know. But in addition to those outlets, we have got the halal market, which is absolutely crucial for us here. And it could take somewhere in the region of 25 to 30% of our volume. And so we're quite lucky, even within our domestic market, we've got quite a few market opportunity, baskets of opportunity, I guess. And we haven't got all of our eggs in one basket, which does help. It does help the situation for us. On the export side as well, just to mention France, France takes somewhere in the region of 40% of all our exports, so it's still a big market. And we also know what our relationship with French farmers can be like. So again, there's a lot of effort that goes into trying to keep that relationship sweet between the UK and France, so that we avoid disruption and blockages at the ports and campaigns at the supermarkets against UK lamb.
I've got two things to ask you, Phil. So, well, one is from Philippa, who they have a farm shop at home. They reckon their shop's been up 450% since the outbreak. That's why she's quite busy at the moment. And then somebody's asked a question, what about carcass balance? How big a problem do you think it is?
I think financially, it's quite a big problem because they're high value products. In terms of volume wise, I think we're talking about somewhere in the region of 10 or 12% of our total throughput. And there are already processors and wholesalers that are chill storing, high value cuts. And I think there's effort now into getting those high value cuts back into those export markets. And we are starting to see some unlocking of the social distancing in other European countries too. So hopefully that will allow some of the catering market to open up and us be able to move those high value cuts into the export trade.
And someone's asking, why do we almost have no lamb exported to China?
To China, we still haven't got health export certificates at the moment. We do have lamb going into China, but it's through a grey route through Hong Kong. So we do, Hong Kong is there on that central, on that middle pie chart. It's only a small volume. It's about 2% of our total export volumes, but it goes to Hong Kong, and a large proportion of that would end up going through into China through a grey route, as they say. But we're still working on trying to get that direct access to China to be an important market for us. Generally, again, I would say from what I've seen in China, it offers two opportunities. One would be, again, those high value opportunities in restaurants and amongst Chinese people that aspire to have those Western lifestyles. But there's also that really valuable fifth quarter market that creates a demand or puts some value into parts of the carcass that we wouldn't dream of eating here in the UK.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, thanks, Phil. We'll let you off for a minute, and we're going to go we're going to go over to Nick, who's going to tell us about positive influences on the UK sheep industry.
Thank you, Fiona. So I'm going to look back at two historical and very important influences that have had a lasting and beneficial impact on the sheep industry, and actually are very relevant to the industry today. And these successes have involved veterinary surgeons. Now, BSE had a devastating impact on our ruminant meat industry, and we realized that our management of TSEs was absolutely essential. And it was thought if BSE had got into our sheep industry, that could have been the end of the industry as we knew it then. And it was hoped and postulated that if we could build resistance to scrapie, there would be some cross protection against BSE. So with the introduction of the National Scrapie Plan in 2001, we managed to blood test many thousands of ewes and rams in the pedigree flocks. And then we were able to demonstrate there was a high level of resistance to scrapie in the pedigree flocks. And we then cascaded those genes into the national flock with great success. And as a direct result of this, we have almost completely eradicated scrapie. And of course, in due course, we realized that BSE had not got into sheep, so the plan was stopped. But as a consequence of this, we have exported UK sheep genetics to many parts of the world. And the company I work for has exported sheep germplasm to 15 different countries in the last 18 months. So this is a testament to the skills of our vets and the regard that our breeding sheep are viewed across the world. And also, if you recall, we are exporting a large amount of finished lamb to Europe and even to the Middle East. And that reflects the importance that we've put on the management of TSEs, in particular scrapie. And because of that, our meat is regarded as being very safe overseas. So that is a massive positive influence, if you like, as a result of a near catastrophic disaster. And the second big success I would mention, even though we got a little bit lucky, was the management of the blue tongue incursion that you can see just about started in 2000. And we got lucky because it didn't get a hold. It came a little bit late, and the following year we were helped out a lot by France. But we did have a very successful collaboration between vets, the pharmaceutical industry, and farmers. And this was the first time that government handed the management of a disease of national importance to the industry and stakeholders rather than take control of itself. So we managed to get the vaccine out there, roll out the delivery to great effect, and we were able to demonstrate that the veterinary profession can deliver, given the tools and the mindset, to deal with a potential major outbreak. And it must be remembered that BTV8 and perhaps BTV4 are still a threat, with blue tongue cases recorded in Belgium in March of this year. So it is a potential threat, but we can demonstrate that that was a very positive influence. And this is reflecting where the industry is now. And it's comforting to know that some positives can come out of a disaster. So turning to more recent innovations that are having a large positive effect on the industry, I'd first like to mention pregnancy scanning, which I see is second on the list, but anyway, it doesn't matter. This has allowed farmers to target feed the pre-lambing flock. This has improved our productivity, improved our welfare, and the survivability and management of our neonatal lambs. So the successful target feeding of pregnant ewes means that we have a direct impact on milk production. And if you like, milk production is really what sheep farming is all about. And I will come on to milk a little bit later in my comments. And condition scoring is extremely useful and a simple technique, and most farmers can learn to do it. And it doesn't matter too much if they're good or bad. The fact that they do it is the important bit. And once you get a handle on that, you can understand how your diet is working and the state of production, and that impacts directly on the productivity. So we are managing our pre-breeding flock better, our in-lamb ewes better, and we are learning that condition score can have lasting effects on the ewes' performance that can be carried over into the following season. And that is research that's being carried out at the moment. And if we then think about the disaster of foot and mouth in 2001, the European Commission decided that perhaps we ought to have a better handle on the way our sheep are being moved, and they proposed the introduction of electronic identification. Now, the industry wasn't overly happy about this because it added cost, but as a result of this, we are able to collect data. Farms are better able to collect performance data of their lambs, manage their flock productivity with much greater ease and accuracy. And this has had a direct benefit on the understanding on how the flock performs, and also, if you like, gives us an insight into the impact of parasites on the way our flock is managed. So these three things have had a massive success and a lasting benefit. But as vets, we are still leaders in the debate and the discussion forums about disease. And if you like, it still is our remit. We are the guys who should be managing disease. We are the guys who should be driving welfare forward. But we need to find ways that will deliver good welfare and push this debate forward. And we need to bring the farmers, and we need to bring the industry with us. And we'll perhaps come on to that with Phil later on towards the end of the presentation. But one of the major medical improvements that has been in the industry has been the use of non-steroidals in the management of pain control in sheep. And if you think, it's not that long ago that we didn't have pain control. We didn't have any suitable drugs. I know we have to cascade these drugs in, but they have been a massive positive impact on welfare of sheep. So using these drugs routinely, particularly in post-lambing ewes, has put a terrific improvement in their level of discomfort. So for example, after a difficult lambing or an assisted lambing when the vet's been out, we can manage that discomfort, and the ewes show the response by getting up really quickly. So it's improved their welfare, it's improved the welfare of the lambs. The ewes are more comfortable, they get up quicker, and they allow the lambs to suckle. And this improves the bonding and enhances the likelihood of the lambs getting through that first 7 days of life. So there's been massive benefits, and we see, particularly in our own flock, benefits in yearling ewes, because they're the ones often that struggle the most at lambing time. They're the ones that have to stretch the birth control for the first time. So anything that improves that discomfort allows them to get up, and if you like, they bond quicker because they're more comfortable. So I see that as being a major asset. So moving on to what I think and Phil think is an important part of where the industry now is farm insurance. And it's very important that the industry can demonstrate to the public that sheep farmers meet certain standards of production. And I'm a big fan of this, and Phil and I sit on Red Tractor Beef and Sheep Technical Advisory Committee, and we continually try to move the standards forward. So as veterinary surgeons, we have a large part to play in the support of these schemes. And realistically, the way we can do that is in health planning. And it's very important that we see this as a vital part of the way that the farm is run. We don't want health planning to be a tick box exercise. We want it to be a genuine engagement between the vet and the farmer so that we can bring real value to this collaboration. And a part of this is for us to be able to demonstrate, excuse me, that we have a level of knowledge that will bring benefit. And I just don't mean in health and disease, but we have a level of understanding of how the industry works, how the industry affects the individual farmer we're speaking to, and how it affects his farm. And it's important to understand what he is trying to do. What is his business? Is he trying to produce finished lambs? Is he producing pedigree sheep? Is he producing ram to use? It's very important that we understand this. And these on the left here are some ideas I think it's worth considering when you sit down to have your discussions and deliberations. And in principle, sheep farming is about milk. It's about used milk. It's about milk quality. It's about the quantity of milk, excuse me, that you have, and the ability that you has to rear these lambs to weaning. Whatever age you choose to wean your lambs at, whether it's 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, it's the delivery of that consistency of milk that's the most important thing. And as I mentioned earlier, the relationship between scanning and condition scoring are essential. So we're trying to produce ewes that are fit enough to produce lively lambs. These lambs are strong enough to get up quickly, and that the milk that the ewes will supply will get those lambs through the initial 5 weeks when they start to eat more grass or fodder or cereals or whatever you choose to feed them to boost that growth curve. So it's the first 5 weeks that it's absolutely essential. And we do bang on about the importance of colostrum. And if you like, that is the elixir of life, the essential for protection. Excuse me.
Can you say colostrum is gold there for us, Nick, please?
Yes, and I'm trying a bit of it myself, and it's very good.
We did wonder what you were drinking.
Well, if I fall off my chair, you'll probably realise. So moving on to weather and climate. I don't really want to talk about climate because climate will undoubtedly have an impact in years to come, but it's weather I wanted to mention, and the weather that affects the individual farm. And it tends to be the two extremes that we're talking about, the extreme wet weather, particularly if it occurs at lambing time, and the very dry when the grass starts to fall back, just at the time when you're considering weaning your lambs. And we need to be in a position to understand where we are. And we need to be able to consider this, and we need to perhaps put mitigation in place so that we can manage the extreme events. Not necessarily a contingency plan, but you can argue that not having a plan could be a welfare issue. It's not easy, but it must be part of the discussion. And when you think back, we lost, I tried to look this figure up, something in the region of 250,000 lambs when the Beast of the East came in. And that's because it came in quickly, and if you like, farmers didn't have contingency plans. And people who were lambing outside, it was disastrous. So you can think that having some form of contingency is probably something that's worth thinking about. And that brings me on to grass. And it's important that we understand the way that grass works. And undoubtedly, we will be looking in future at the relationship with soil quality, soil management, and grass production and conservation. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a farm that's a lowland farm, or whether it's a mixed farm, or whether it's an arable or upland or mountain farm. Grass is the driving force. And I know Phil is a massive fan of promoting the fact that we have a grass-based industry. and it gives us a product that people want to buy. So it has a massive impact on growth of our lambs. And of course, we're becoming more interested in the actual product itself, in as much as its flavour and the eating experience. And we know that people enjoy eating sheep meat because it is a wonderful product. And that brings me on to genetics and the importance of putting genetics in the right environment. We have to have lambs that get up quickly. We have to have lambs that can survive to suckle ewes, that have the genetic capacity, and we have to have ewes that have genetic capacity to produce milk and colostrum, and that these mothers have the mothering instinct to bond quickly and nurture these lambs. So the largest loss of lambs is in the first 48 hours, but it's not always disease. If there are issues at lambing, then this can be exacerbated by ewes that don't demonstrate the positive instincts. So from my perspective, I think that the breeders of terminal sires have taken great strides to improve the growth rates, carcass quality, if you like, and fat management over the last 20 years. And I don't think we're going to see very big improvements now because, if you like, we've done a lot of the improvements. But where we could see improvements and where we need to move the conversation forward and improve the genetic and put more science into the genetics is in the dam lines. So when you sit down and have your discussions and review the makeup of the ewe flock, it's important to understand what genes there are in the ewe flock. So by way of example, the national flock has in the region of 2 million North Country mules. If you like, it's the traditional way of producing lambs by having a crossbred ewe. And it makes up a big proportion of our finished lamb production. But there's very little science put into the production of most of these ewes. There's little science put into the combination of the sire and the dam. So we need to drive the industry forward and see some more application of science. We need to be able to demonstrate that these ewes do have the capacity to produce more milk, more lambs, prolificacy, better mothering ability. They can produce more kilos of meat per hectare. So rather than relying on the historical evidence that some breeds are more prolific, milky, we need to be able to demonstrate or prove that they carry the genetics that will bring the farmer the traits he wishes to move his business forward. So that when he goes to purchase his replacement mule ewe lambs or yearlings, he just doesn't buy the one in that pen because they got the prettiest faces. He buys them in that pen because that guy has got the genes, he's got the science to tell him that he's got the genes in his flock that will give him percentage points improvements in mothering ability or milkiness or prolificacy. And this is where the industry needs to move in the next 10 years. And remember, it costs the same to keep a poor sheep as it does a good sheep. And moving on to ram management, which follows a little bit about what we've been talking about before. But it's often the case that the poorer ram gets forgotten when we do these health plans. So we should encourage to think about their rams, and they need to think about the long time before they need them to work. And remember that most rams don't do anything for 10 months of the year. They just put in a paddock down the end of the farm and often get forgotten. And when the ewes get fluke drenched, they get forgotten as well. And in the winter, they often get forgotten, they don't get fed enough. And if you're buying ram lambs, it's essential that these ram lambs are fed over the winter to get through. But remember that rams should be thought about 10 weeks before they're acquired. This is a long time. Rams should be put to work in the beginning of October, need to be considered at the latter end of July. And in July, farmers are busy. They don't have time to do this. So if you want rams to last, you have to look after them. You have to check them regularly. You have to check them a long way before we get round to using them. I'm trying to run out of time, so I can just move this forward quickly. I'm also of the opinion that farmers should use purebred rams rather than crossbred rams because we have issues with consistency of product. The product going to them to market is, the supermarkets are concerned always that there is a lack of consistency. So if you use crossbred rams, you're diluting down the genes. Instead of having 50% from the ram, you're having 25% from the two different rams. So it's important that we think about what rams are being used in the flock, and if the farmer wants to use a crossbred ram, fine, that's entirely up to him. But it's important that you understand this and can engage with it. And finally, just one bit I want to just chuck in here, because this is probably the elephant in the room, and that's farmer engagement and farmer enthusiasm with regard to their farm and the business. And when you're sitting down having your discussions about health and welfare and where the farmer's going, you should fairly quickly get a handle on whether the farmer's interested and whether he's actually going to listen to what you said, or whether he just wants that box ticked for red tractor. And it's something we may touch on a little bit later at the end of discussions. But farmer engagement and having perhaps some farmers in the industry who perhaps shouldn't be hanging up their wellies, I don't know.
Nick, that's brilliant, thank you. There are a couple of questions that I'm going to touch on now whilst we're still with you on this page. So one person says that you say the most improvements needed in the terminal sire genetics have been done, but they want to know why so few breeders actually use EBVs and indices to select their rams, when the difference can be, you know, 10 pounds per lamb per year between a superior and a poorer ram. £10 per ewe per year.
I wish I could answer that question, to be honest. We produced recorded rams, and it's amazing how few farmers actually want to ask. So some of it is down to us. We're not good enough at promoting it. And it's important, of course, that the ram is fit to do the job. So in other words, EBVs are fantastic for telling you the hidden traits sometimes, but the important ones, often the ones you can see. So in other words, he must have the right quality skin. He must have the right quality wool. He must have correct legs and good feet and good testicles. Those aren't in the EBVs. So what you have to do is look at a ram to make sure he's fit for purpose, then look at the EBVs afterwards. And farmers are traditionals. They like to look at what a sheep looks like rather than the hidden genetics. And
yeah, so somebody does say, how important is it that they do look good visually, the lambs? Is that more important than the quality of the carcass?
It depends how you're selling your lambs. If you're selling your lambs direct to market, it doesn't matter what they look like. It's what they look like hung up. It's how they weigh and what they look like on the hook.
I think it's fair to say that in the marketplace, Nick, you know, there are not enough premiums paid for quality lambs, and poorer quality lambs aren't discounted enough. You know, there's still an awful lot of general trade that fluctuates a lot, and the fluctuations in the trade can certainly outweigh any premiums for a quality of a product.
Yes, but there's two things to consider. The first thing is speed to market. So if you've got the genetics that can get your lambs to market 2 weeks sooner than the next guy, then that's a massive benefit, and that's not necessarily something you see. If you're talking about improvement in carcass quality or body shape, if you like, well, then that is evident. But invariably, what we're talking about here is speed to market. The shortest amount of time the lamb is on the farm, the better it is for the farmer.
And we'll come on
to move us on, but somebody does. I think they're getting at the fact that you're a pedigree breeder, Nick, and they want to point out that crossbreds could potentially have higher libido fertility. So maybe it's a bit of a dig at the pedigree. I think
that's absolute nonsense, frankly.
But thank you. I'm going to move on to Phil's slides, and although we've jammed at the moment, we'll pass over to Phil, and we'll come back to discussion and questions afterwards.
Okay, so this is where I think we start to look at the future. You know, the future changes that are going to affect our industry. And, you know, I could be quite optimistic about it. You've got to be careful about being optimistic within agriculture. The two things aren't great bedfellows, are they, really? Optimism and livestock farming. But, you know, you could be really, when we look back at some of the failings of our sector, you know, you could be quite optimistic about where some of the changes are going to come from and where they're going to lead to. But this really goes back to, it seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? But June 2016, which was the EU referendum, when we took that decision to come out of Europe, and shortly after that, you know, Westminster and all of our devolved nations started to work up their new plans, their new visions, their strategy, their thinking for farming and food. And there was a very common theme that came out of that, really. And just bear in mind that our government within Europe, the UK within Europe, has probably been the leading edge of trying to push for the reform of the common agricultural policy and to try to reduce or remove subsidies from agriculture. So, you know, none of us should be surprised about the direction of policy that was soon talked about after that decision to leave the European Union was made. And this was the common theme, I think, that came out of all of our nations. Our future direction was about increasing our productivity. Now, again, for probably 2.5 years, most people read that and thought this is all about a growing global population and the fact that we need to produce more food to feed this growing population of people. And it's only been really over the last 9 months that people have twigged that productivity isn't about production levels at all. Productivity is a means of measuring performance, and it's about profitability. It's about widening that gap between the cost of production and the value of the output from the system. So what the government is meaning there is that they want our farming enterprises to be more profitable and to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and therefore be less reliant on subsidy. So our farming enterprises are being driven to be more efficient, more productive, and more profitable. That's got to be a good thing. You know, that's really got to be a good thing. And going back to some of the tables that Fiona showed at the outset, you know, we know that a large proportion, 75% maybe of our sheep farming population are producing their cost of production are below the value of their output, and that's not a great place to be. So for the industry to move on to be more profitable and productive isn't something that we can criticize. It's got to be a good thing. And then the second main objective was to protect and further improve our environment. And again, that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, given that huge environmental movement here in the UK and I guess globally as well, but certainly here in the UK is a huge environmental movement. And then more recently, I guess there's been this real movement around carbon and climate change and natural capital and all those sorts of things. And so this 2-point direction gives the government a chance to do 2 things really. One is to push the industry towards a position where our farming is more efficient and more profitable, but then to reward farmers and land managers for good environmental management and for low carbon or net zero carbon farming approaches, all those sorts of things. Now, it's an interesting one within sheep farming because I believe that sheep farming, probably more so than any other agricultural enterprise, is in a situation where those 2 things interrelate and are not separate. You know, and if you just think of that on the most basic level, you know, all of our productivity goes on in our fields, on our hills, in those areas of grass. And it's those grassland areas that are largely the part of the environmental schemes that sheep farmers are paid for, or rewarded for. You know, it's grassland management largely. It's hedgerows and walls as well, but it's grassland management. It is a large part of the agri-environment scheme, and it is the environment that is valued. So it gives us some real opportunities, and we can put the sheep industry forward as a multifunctional, holistic sector that is not just providing a fantastic product or food, but is also producing or providing a great environment, a good landscape, protecting carbon, providing great habitats for nesting birds. And again, that is where the money is going to come from in the future. And I guess that'll take us on to the next couple of slides when we start to talk about the future structure of schemes. So how does that develop in terms of the likely future outline scheme development? Well, the good news is, I think, that right at the beginning of this discussion, the government was very certain and sure, and gave some strong commitments that the industry was not going to fall off a cliff. We were not going to do what happened in New Zealand and simply withdraw subsidies overnight. Farmers, again, were going to be allowed a period of transition. The challenge we've got, I guess, is making sure that we as an industry do make use of that transition, and we truly make a transition, and we don't just hang on for as long as we possibly can and then fall off a cliff as we get closer to 2028. But what we're going to end up with is from 2021 until 2028, a 7-year period, gradually declining basic payment scheme. And while the basic payment money declines, we'll see the gradual introduction of new schemes, and those schemes will increasingly go towards ELMS, the new environmental land management scheme. And the plan is that in 2024 we'll see a national rollout of ELMS, a national pilot, if you like, but it'll be a national rollout of ELMS schemes. And until that point, we'll continue to see countryside stewardship schemes. So there should be an ongoing process of farmers being able to join agri-environment schemes, and the importance of those agri-environment schemes are likely to increase as from 2024. So again, there'll be that slow transition, that balancing really of a reduction in basic payment, an increase in environmental payments and reward for public good and environmental land management schemes. And then alongside that, in terms of government's encouragement or incentives to try to encourage better levels of productivity, we're likely to see two strands of funding or support. One is what is being called the Pathway Programme, and you may well have heard about the Pathway Programme. We can talk about that in more detail in a moment, but the Pathway Programme is all about trying to get farmers on an increasing and growing level of animal health management and animal welfare outcomes or outputs as well. So the Pathway is all about animal health and animal welfare. And then there's likely to be some capital grant schemes and maybe something in terms of a productivity or an efficiency scheme that provides investment, potentially capital investment in things like maybe fences, double fences to provide better biosecurity and better environmental conditions, maybe EID readers, improved handling equipment, the capital grant aid to improve productivity and resource management going forward. And who knows, that might even extend into things such as lime treatments to improve the pH of soils, to optimize nutrient uptake from grass and crops. It might go towards providing incentives for farmers to select their stock from known sources that have got a known disease status or are EBV animals as well, so we know we've got an indication of their genetic performance. So we'll see those two other strands of work of support coming in alongside ELMS to incentivize better health management and to enable farmers to invest in certain areas to increase their productivity. And it's, before we pass over to this one, it's really important, I think, that people have recognized that one of the biggest areas of to improve productivity within the sheep industry is to improve health and disease control as well.
Okay, sorry, and do you want to go straight to this one, Phil, because it sort of is a bit where you were there with your grants? Yeah.
So this was a slide that we saw just last week, really, and it's come out of the Pathway team, the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England, who are planning the Pathway the Pathway Programme. And if you start down that bottom left-hand corner, we're talking about a programme that would allow farmers to get on board, get access to small welfare grants, and that could be for things like EID readers or for more efficient sheep handling equipment. It might then move on to allow people access to grants to increase or improve their productivity. Again, that might take us into things that improve grassland management, soil management, again, get into genetics a little bit. And then we could end up moving towards large animal welfare grants. It would be more maybe around housing. And again, improving housing conditions for sheep will do two things. It will both improve resource efficiency, improve environmental management through better grassland management, but also improve productivity. And then we might, through a test and trial approach or a pilot approach, exactly the same as is being used with ELMS. There's somewhere in the region of 60 different test and trial projects going on within ELMS, and we'll see something similar within the Pathway with different farmers just trialing different approaches. We might then move more towards some payment, a reward payment for results. And again, whether that's welfare outcomes that are over and above basic legislative requirements, or whether it's for animal health management, that again goes above basic legislative requirements. So again, I'd like to see that would be the area, somewhere along that line would be the area where there were incentives or rewards to encourage farmers to work more closely with vets, more in the area of flock health planning, and less in the area of fire brigade management. It would incentivize farmers to maybe be part of accreditation, health accreditation schemes, or to get involved with blood screening and disease screening programs. A whole area of work that would just raise the health and disease status of our flock. And again, the other thing within all of that is that we're likely to see some national programs for disease control, and it's yet to be decided what those might be within the sheep sector. It always seems to be a real challenge for the sheep sector to come up with one or two major diseases or parasites that it needs to overcome, because again, our farms are so different and people have different challenges, and we always seem to fall back on the fact that the best thing that we can do, if there's one thing that sheep farmers can do, the best thing we can do is to have that close working relationship with a vet to identify where the problems on that farm lie and where the changes or the interventions can be made to improve health and improve productivity. So, but alongside that, there are probably likely to be one or two national programs, and a good example of that would be sheep scab, possibly, that we are likely to see some national sheep scab program that farmers have the chance to enter into, because it's probably only through more collaborative and strategic involvement in a program like that that we're ever going to get on top of a problem like sheep scab. Brilliant,
thanks, Phil. What I'm going to do is move us on, which this is almost our final slide. It's a sort of pulling things together. We can all have a. There's a couple of one of the questions. I'm also going to launch a poll, which I'd quite like people to answer whilst we're going, if that's possible. Has that come up? Can attendees see that poll? Yeah, so please feel free to answer the poll as you're going. This might be too much going on at once now. But I'd also like Phil, and so Phil, somebody's asked you, how many breeding females will the UK sheep flock have in 2028? But I think they mean, where do you think our industry's going in the next?
Yeah, do you know, there's, I mean, the true answer to that is I haven't got a clue, but I think you can make a really strong case that there is absolutely no reason why it should be any less than it is now. And I think there's several reasons for that. You know, one, globally, the demand for sheep meat is increasing. You know, we're still seeing declines here in the UK. There's a lot of work going on to try to turn that around. It's going to be a battle, but you know, there is still optimism to grow the UK market. And again, we've still got that big battle to play out between that extensive, high health, high quality meat against those low value proteins, if you like, chicken and pork. And again, who knows how you know, consumer trends are going to change over the years in that respect. But globally, and certainly in the Middle East and in China, that demand for protein is going to grow with their growing population, and their growth in wealth is still likely to drive a move towards people wanting to eat more sheep meat. So globally, you know, just bear in mind that the UK, we're a tiny island. Look at us on an atlas. We're a tiny island. We're the third largest exporter of sheep meat globally. You know, we're good at it. We you know, our processors are really effective at breaking down carcasses and placing products in different parts of the market all across the world. You know, we're really good at this. And if we get that global trade development right, there's no reason why we should see our market decline. Bear in mind as well that we are still under environmental pressure in the uplands. And again, I would say, my view is that we're in a situation in many of our upland areas where our environment and our habitats are actually being damaged by an absence or a lack of grazing. not by overgrazing, but an absence of grazing, which is leading to coarse vegetation and a reduction in plant and floristic diversity in some of our real natural and semi-natural grasslands, but environmentally as well. You can bet your life that there'll be more incentives for the return of more grassland into arable areas. And again, that could see the growth of that livestock arable rotation. And some of that will be taken up by sheep farming. So I really am very optimistic, and there's no reason why we should see our sheep flock decline over that period of time, in my mind.
You're in the right job then, Phil.
Yeah,
that's good.
just to pick up on what Phil said just then. Traditionally, sheep were very important in arable farming, and in the old-fashioned systems where you had arable and livestock running together, and they do have a terrific benefit on soil quality, the soil makeup, and soil stability. So I think we will see a movement of sheep into some of these very big arable farms because of their unique way of improving the rotation and improving soils. Because in principle, soil likes muck, and sheep are the best ones at putting muck on the ground that doesn't cost a lot of money. So I think we will see a return to sheep on these, and particularly on the eastern counties where they do need help in restoring their soil quality. Absolutely. And sheep are really good at doing that. So
and it's already starting to create new business opportunities for young people who don't necessarily need to own land, and the level of capital investment is relatively low. So again, in terms of bringing youngsters into the industry, it's a really good first rung on that ladder still.
And if you like, on the back of that, these people need advice, they need help. So vets will have a big part to play in the movement of the sheep industry going forward, because we do have issues with disease in the national flock. We do need to get the national flock cleaner. We're good at improving certain small, high-value flocks. We can manage the major diseases in them, but we need to move this management out into the bigger commercial flocks and pull the level of, if you like, iceberg diseases down and get a better handle on what's going on. So we do have big opportunities. And I think the pathway looks to me like to possibly be a way forward for further veterinary engagement, but we have to demonstrate as sheep vets that we are equipped to deliver this advice, that we are trained, we have learned, we've taken steps to improve our CPD, so we've taken steps to improve our knowledge, and we're not just relying on the fact that we're existing from memory from when we were at vet school. We are making sure that we are the professionals who can deliver this information and this skill base.
Can I come in, Fiona? Can I just make a point there? You're going to hate me for this, but again, it just that comment just allows me to raise that issue that that I keep banging on about, which is that the need for more integrated thinking and holism. And I think in the future, we are going to need vets who are vets and are trained as vets and have got a thorough understanding of diseases and parasites and all those sorts of things. But they are going to need to just know a little bit about the way that soils function. And they didn't know a little bit about about grassland management, because those sorts of areas, those sorts of subjects, I guess, are the platform. They're the foundation for sheep health.
We do need definitely a more holistic approach, and there's no reason why sheep vets can't be the people to deliver that.
That's a very good plug for our third webinar, where we've got both Liz, Jennifer and Leslie speaking on grassland management and sort of bigger picture. There's also an interesting question here. Do you see the future of the sheep vet continuing to be local vet who's critical, or do you see it as a more consultancy-based, remotely managed, or a collaboration of both? Now, sheep will always be in the hands of the general practitioner to a certain degree, I think, but we need to have people who have done further qualifications and stuff within each practice. We need to have keen sheep vets within each practice, I think. I think we've gone on the days we have practices where actually they're not that interested in sheep and they're dealing with sheep farmers. I don't particularly think, if your practice is not interested in sheep, then really that's not the right place for sheep farmers to go. Don't know how you two feel about that.
Absolutely. I think the opportunities are there for people to learn more and understand more about. I mean, to be fairly honest, it's not rocket science learning how to to deliver lambs. You know, we can, when you've done a couple of years lambing experience, you're pretty good at lambing sheep, and you can do seizures. So we can do the fire brigade stuff. We can do the post-mortems, that sort of thing. But we need to take the more holistic approach. So we need to be able to understand how soil and grass works. How good is a farmer at conserving grass? Can he put grass in the clamp that's going to feed those ewes over the winter? And is he able to understand the fact that if he's using a sheep dip, is it appropriate to tip that sheep dip on the muck heap? You know, we have to be aware of the environmental impacts, and it's our job, if you like, to make sure the farmers do take us on board, but we have to prove we have that knowledge. We can't expect the farmer to phone us up and say, come down, you're a good chap and help me out with my sheep. No, we have to be able to say to him, actually, I can come down and help you with your sheep because I know a bit about sheep. This is my interest, and I have made the effort to learn more about it, and I think I can bring a benefit to your industry and to your business. So it's for us to promote ourselves, not to rely on the government to say, get your local vet in. No, we have to be able to go out there and promote ourselves. And I think Phil would probably go along with that.
Yeah, I would definitely. And there will be the need for both local or regional vets and national specialists as well. I think the greater connections we got between those two, the better the veterinary profession will support the industry.
Yeah, very good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off the webinar so everyone can go if they want to go, but we can keep chatting and answering questions if, you know, I want people to feel they can move on if they want to. And so I will just click through here, but please don't go away if you want to keep rattling through the questions. So I think as a summary to that, and as both Nick and Phil have just said, I strongly believe there will be increasing a need for decent sheep vets, and a lot of the way the government stuff is going is putting that out. So if you are wanting to disappear because we've been going for an hour, please can we just once again say thank you to everyone who supported us, pharmaceutical companies, particularly thank you to MSD Animal Health and Project Lamb for supporting this particular webinar, and just to say, if you've enjoyed it and you want to donate, then there is an option to do that. It is an option, but we're well aware with conferences not happening. Today would have been the dinner for the Sheep Vet conference in Belfast, you know, and usually we'd be passing around a hat or having a raffle or something. If you feel able to give to one of these charities who are probably losing out at the moment, then please do. And there's a website there, and we'll send that link round if you want to. No obligation, but otherwise I just want to say thank you to the people who want to go. I've had 69 people have voted, so I'm going to share that in a minute, but if you haven't yet voted, just get in there. You've got another couple of minutes to vote so we can gather your opinion. And actually these the answer to these polls will be really helpful as we are working with the sheep pathway and with the government to put things together. The more evidence we have for how vets think that they are placed to support sheep farmers is very helpful. So we will actually be using these polls usefully. So, you know, please be encouraged to vote. And meanwhile, if you're still with us and you haven't gone, and we can go to a couple, there's too many words in some of these questions for me to read them out quickly. There's a comment, not a question here, from Jonathan. There'll be several clients that will reject or ignore your advice, but do not get despondent. Keep going and thrive off those who do engage positively. And I would really, I'd go with that, Jonathan, because that's absolutely, there are plenty of sheep farmers out there who really, really do want to engage with a decent sheep vet. And it is very, yeah, it's very stimulating work. And so I'm with you there, Jonathan. Thank you for that. Have you two spotted any questions that you want to jump in and answer?
Again, I love that question from the anonymous attendee about increasing domestic consumption and marketing lamb with its environmental credentials. And I think absolutely, you know, I think one of our problems is for the last couple of decades, the industry has been pushed to try to do what the poultry and the pig industry had done and to compete with them on price. And we were never going to be able to do that without changing the system fundamentally. You know, our approach to agriculture is free range, it's very grass-based, it's very natural. And I think we've got to add value, create more of a premium product, and develop the market based on its credentials, which is not just a green and nutritious, but also one that has got higher levels of omega-3 and 6, and has got added micronutrients, and it really is a health-giving product. And at the same time, if we get it right, it's delivering all those habitats that we want for the wildlife that we all love, the lapwings and the skylarks and the curlews and all that sort of stuff. So we've got to do that. And I would also, again, this is a personal view, but my view is that we've got an incredibly diverse industry with a very diverse range of breeds and approaches, and we shouldn't be we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. We should try to use it as a positive. We should celebrate that and actually try and market not all, but some of our products based on that. And some of you may have seen some work we did a little while ago on the potential for creating a heritage breed scheme. And again, it's not going to be for a whole carcass market, but you imagine that tourism, that hospitality market, starting to celebrate some of the stuff, the products that we've got with its diversity and its provenance. And I think we can build a real premium market on that basis.
Yeah. Actually, and there's very few sheep farms that you're embarrassed to take a member of the public to, and you can't always say that about every farming system. And I think that's something that the more we shout about, the better. Lambs out in a field is just the sort of top of the picture. But somebody here, and whoever this anonymous person is, about the challenges for vets having reliable and accurate data, and how do we encourage and help farmers record that. I would encourage you to stick with the webinars. We will be looking at data, both, particularly the final one is on flock health data on farms, but next, in a fortnight's time as well, we've got a number of farmers on, and they're going to be talking about how they think vets can help them and how they would like their vets to work with them. And some of those guys are really good at collecting data, so might have some few top tips for us. So stick with us.
I mean, it's interesting now, isn't it, Fiona, that more and more now when we're talking about flock health planning, we are talking about starting with some fairly basic KPIs or benchmarks so that we know whether the flock is performing. And if it's not, then there's a good reason to go and look a bit deeper as to why it's not performing in the way it should do. So, farmers almost need to start by doing some of that benchmarking and looking at some of those key performance indicators.
There's one here from Erin, who's in New Zealand, asking about meloxicam, metacam, and basically I think it's what I was saying in my presentation. There is people
breaking up there.
Sorry,
we lost your audio there, Nick.
Oh, sure.
Just try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Going back to about he's mentioning about non-steroidals and also the benefits of EID. Well, I think I covered both.
No. Sorry, I don't know what's happened to your connection there, Nick. We can't really hear you.
Must be the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
It's got better now.
Well, you've got it inside your computer, have you?
Well, it's next to me. I'm tempted to eat it. But EID, I mean, if you're going to collect data, invariably you need EID because you need to be able to track lambs, see how they're performing. If you're looking at using production as an idea of how you're doing, whether your lambs are putting on enough weight week by week, or whether you just want to know how many lambs you've had born to how many you've gone around. So lots of basic stuff people can do to collect data. And once it's just making a start, isn't it? Getting vets to engage on it. What was the other one? There was something about measuring test scores down in the southwest.
Just whilst you're talking, Nick, I'm going to share. I've just sharing the poll results for everyone's interest. So 75 people voted, and I'll just share those results so people can flick through them as you're speaking.
So just talking about measuring rams testicles at sales, this has always been a bit of an issue. Measuring rams testicles, in my view, unless you're doing it on an individual basis, is quite tricky. If you set a testicle size as a benchmark and you measure it, if you get 10 different vets measure, you'll end up with 10 different answers. And if we're talking about testicles that are the right size, they don't need measuring. So it's only the testicles that are the size where they're starting to feel like a bit small, that you measure them, and then you run into issues by saying, well, I think it's 1 centimetre below, he says it's 1 centimetre, and you end up with a massive argument. So what you need is experienced inspectors to examine the ram's testicles at these sales. And if you do that, then that's a reasonably good way to move it forward. But it's a conversation we have endlessly about how to get the decent sized testicles into rams at the sales.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nick. Right, do we want to just flick through? Oh, somebody's raised a hand.
Oh no.
Jim, I don't know what we can do with you. Can you put a question in, Jim? He's raised a hand. Can we allow Jim to talk? We were just about to wind up. Have you got a very quick question, Jim?
He has. He's appeared. Unmute yourself, Jim.
Oh, we can't do that, actually.
I'm not sure.
Let me unmute him. Apologies, I'm really sorry, Jim. Can you put it into the question box? It won't let me unmute you for some reason. I think it's just about 8:45, so I think we will round up. As far as the poll results, is everyone able to look through those on your screen? Can you access them on the screen? Basically, very quickly, out of the major positive factors the sheep industry has going for it, extensive nature of sheep farming comes up, but very close behind and very important, ability to fit in with other enterprises and the environmental credentials, much of what Phil and Nick and everyone's been talking about. Biggest challenges is the economics. Single thing you think would most help one of your sheep farmers who you don't currently have much contact with is collecting basic flock data, and that's the same as a single thing you most struggle with, even with the most engaged sheep farmers. Data is a big thing there. But getting vet time on farm and using a flock health plan, and for the ones you're not currently having contact with, is to join the Flock Health Club. Those funding for vet work, that's an interesting one. I'm never sure that providing funding for it is the answer, but actually a number of people do believe that, nearly a fifth. Okay, I think probably we should round up. We've already gone quite a bit over. Can I finish by saying thank you very, very much to both Phil and Nick for joining us and for contributing so well and answering all the questions. Can I say thank you very much to MSD, Project LAM, and to all the other sponsors. All the logos are here. Yeah, and if you do feel that you want to give funds to either Send a Cow or Vet Life, then please go to that Just Giving page and contribute. And please join us in a fortnight's time. We'll put the registration information out all over social media again and via normal channels. So register and join us again in a fortnight. Brilliant.
Fiona, can I just say thank you to you and others for organising it, and thank you for inviting me to take part. It's been an absolute pleasure, and anytime, you know, I'm willing to if I can. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thanks for arranging it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got a good all. Thanks.